Greetings, everyone. I'm excited to welcome Andy Black, CEO at Kovr, and Sri Iyer, founder and CTO at Kovr. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us. We
Hey, Ben.
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, great to have you both on. So we'll get some different perspectives here. But Sri, how about you kick off first? Tell us a little about your background, and then we'll ask Andy.
Yeah, sure. So Sri Iyer, I'm the CTO at Kovr. Right before this, I was at Amazon Web Services. So I was the senior manager for the specialty solutions architect team and the emerging technology team. So my largest team was AI machine learning. So a lot of the solutions architects that help customers use AWS, I was working with them, specifically focused around public sector. Prior to that, I was director of AI and automation at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then that became Guidehouse, and we acquired some life sciences and other companies. And then before that, I've been working in the defense and national security space. So I was at Raytheon and then Lockheed as a technical lead. I was the technical lead on Scattered Castles and then the chief architect for the F-35 Digital War Room. And then I'm an Army guy, so I was a staff sergeant, enlisted, not related to tech at all. So I was a 13 series working with an infantry company. So that's where I got started.
Oh, wow, quite the background. So Army plus, big companies, now startup. Appreciate that intro. And then Andy, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so thanks for asking. I was Sri's sort of battle buddy at Amazon Web Services. So we worked very closely together, leading the emerging technology portfolio there. So it's fun, right? You get into to both deal with at the builder level, what are these new and novel capabilities like quantum or AI or high performance computing, really useful for, right? That's sort of product market fit. But then also working with big Amazon on sort of roadmap items and figuring out how to do business in certain places like the US government. Before that, I was at Gartner, sort of a consigliere position for enterprise technology leaders, a lot of digital transformation, enterprise IT strategy. And then a big part of it was standing up AI centers of excellence within some of these enterprises. So it was a lot of fun there. Before that, and at Gartner, I was also a sales leader. So I had led sales in a couple of different verticals in the public sector. Then before that, I was a startup guy. So I built companies, and along the way, I got 3 masters, no bachelors, and I still teach at Georgetown. So a little bit of a mix of small business startup time, MBA, big business time, and then some time in and around the United States government.
Well, impressive, both of you guys bringing some huge experience to Kovr. So Sri, let's talk about Kovr. What products and/or services does Kovr offer?
Yeah. So, as someone that's been a software engineer and I've been, leading different systems in both, all kinds of regulated markets like life sciences, healthcare, mostly like the federal government as well. Anytime you try to deploy software, the person that's owning that risk, that person that's actually going to be operating that software gets to have a vote on how valid that software is and how secure it is for the data that it's going to house. And a lot of times we call that compliance or, authority to operate, which is what the federal government uses. And typically that can be a very onerous process, the more regulated that market is. And so if you think about the federal government, you've got things like FedRAMP and, for states, it's like StateRAMP. You've got other standards in healthcare like HIPAA, GDPR in Europe. And so there's all these standards. And in fact, I think when Andy and I first started this business, like the number of compliance standards is not decreasing, it's increasing. And the complexity of those systems is also increasing, right? So you're getting more and more code. The systems are more complicated. There's AI now in a lot of systems. And so really like deciding how secure those systems are is more and more onerous for both the system owner and as well as the people that are developing that software. And in the government, I really experienced that problem a lot because I've got a lot of friends that are startup CEOs, are CTOs. They founded tech companies. They're working out in areas like aerospace. And I think the government and military, like as a former military guy, we would benefit a ton from that technology. But it just takes so long for them to get authorized and go through that compliance process. I mean, companies like DocuSign took 7 years to get their ATO for FedRAMP. It's gotten better, right? I think it's about 2 years, $2 million is about the average cost, but that's a lot for a new company and a startup. And then similarly, internally in the government themselves, like they build a lot of systems. So, State Department has hundreds of systems that they operate. The Air Force has thousands that they're operating. And those are also stuck in some of these blockages of trying to get through these compliance processes. And so what Kovr does is really we take generative AI and large language models and we try to apply it to that problem so that you can shrink down a process that normally would take months to years. And we can do it in as little as 15 minutes in some cases. And so really that acceleration, and it's something that I think a lot of people have thought of, wanting to automate this process for years, but it's only really been possible in the last couple of years with some of the breakthroughs we've had in Gen AI.
Yeah, and appreciate that overview. And you mentioned that the kind of that DocuSign example, but I want to make sure people really understand here. So if I'm a company, want to do business, say with a federal entity or a regulated industry, for example, and I want to get in there, you're helping them kind of navigate that roadmap, that path to be compliant so they can get all the boxes checked, I assume, so they can start selling into those entities.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have to put together these large sort of like assessment packages that then an auditor or an assessor is going to come and look at and the government's going to approve. And so our software will like completely assemble that package for you. We'll also do the assessment piece. So you do like a gap assessment, figure out how compliant your code, your systems are to these different NIST standards or ISO and other types of standards like that. And so that's typically what we're helping with. Now, like the goal of our product is not to replace humans. It's really like to get rid of all that really annoying, tedious work of just putting all the information together and generating these documents and things like that. I think there's still like a lot of like the human in the loop, getting experts to actually do what experts are supposed to do. When I used to sell RPA, it was very similar, right? RPA, you want to automate the mundane, repetitive processes, but still leave room for those experts to do what they're supposed to be doing, not like, combing through lots of documents and things like that.
So helping companies navigate that compliance world. And then so what industries does this generally fall into? And we'll talk about go-to-market in a bit, but is there a certain ideal customer profile that's coming up and in what type of industry?
Yeah, and we're as a new company, I think we're still kind of defining a little bit of that, but ideally, from an industry perspective, it's any company that's trying to sell into a regulated market where there is a large cybersecurity compliance burden that they have to take on. And then conversely, also any sort of large organizations that internally have a lot of compliance programs as well. So, our customers, it could be like the Air Force themselves, right? They run a large suite of applications, but also companies trying to sell to the Air Force, right? So anything from like Tableau down to like Databricks to small little startups as well. Like we've got a number of those in our portfolio that are just 1 or 2 years old, but they've got to solve this problem. So you're looking at that sort of our target sort of customer base. And the owners could be, your typical CISO kind of profiles as well at those companies. A lot of times for smaller companies, that's usually part of the CTO, CIO function. And then for large enterprises, you really have a lot of different owners in those. So like the DevOps teams own a lot of that burden because they've got to build all the architecture diagrams and validate all the systems. So those DevOps teams, but then also the ISOs and compliance teams within those organizations as well could be customers for us.
Yeah, makes sense. And the customers that you're going after right now, could they be kind of smaller SMBs trying to sell into a large org? And I assume also large orgs selling into large orgs. So do you see a range of company sizes as your prospect?
Yeah, I mean, some of our largest customers are like, in the $1 billion valuation category, and some of our very small customers are seed stage, right? And so it's a huge spectrum. And I think that depending on where the interesting thing is everyone is facing the same problem. It's just the resources you have probably vary a little bit, but then the larger your companies, the larger your boundaries and footprints are, so that problem is more complex. And so I think that both small and large organizations benefit from this AI acceleration that Kovr provides. Now, I think especially for the smaller ones, there's less in the toolkit right now. People joke, what's my biggest competitor? And in some of these regulated markets, it's like Excel, right? People are using spreadsheets and Jira and just like manual tools. That's really what's out there in a lot of these, highly regulated spaces. And so, especially in the federal government, there's not a lot of tooling that automates this stuff. And so getting stuff accredited to be able to do that is, a huge part of it. And so I think a lot of small companies benefit a huge amount from not having that several $100,000 to $1 million bill to put this stuff together.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And Sri, you mentioned kind of early on, or early stages here. So what year did you found Kovr?
So Kovr started in October of 2024. And so we are, I think, I guess 7 months in, something like that.
Yeah.
Math is going to, but yeah.
So it is early stages.
Yeah, still in our first year. And so, yeah, we are, I think as you know, we're using it to raise money, and sure Andy's going to talk about that as well. And then we've hit a lot of our benchmarks as far as customers go and got, good traction in the market, I think, so far. So pretty excited for some of the use cases we've already kind of been able to solve.
Well, that's great. Yeah, less than 12 months, a lot going on here. So things sound positive. So yeah, let's switch over to the fundraising side. So you've raised some money. How much have you, and I don't know, Andy, you've taken this, but how much capital have you raised to date now?
Yeah, 3.6. So we've raised 3.6 over these last several months. We were really, I'd say we sort of being very transparent for the community to sort of founder to founder conversation here. Yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about like, do we take money or do we try to bootstrap this? I bootstrapped my first. It is a noble journey. It's a great journey. In this case, the deciding factor for us became time, that this was going to be a very fast moving market, and our need to move with the speed and clarity that we needed meant that we needed to have capital behind us in order to go pursue both the IP portfolio, the go-to-market motion, a number of things. So yeah, it ended up coming down to a decision of speed and being really choosy about those partners that we bring in on the cap table.
Okay. Yeah, and that does come up, a bit with, especially with AI first companies where it's just evolving so fast that speed to market is so important. And then sometimes, right, you just need those high powered engineers as well, to get the product off the ground.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's in AI industries, I think we found that the capability of the underlying technology, and specifically frontier models, has now outpaced the application of those models to business problems, which is to say, a lot of the primitives, so in Amazon speak, we would say primitives, right? You provide the building blocks that people assemble to create value for a customer. A lot of the primitives exist. And so there's a lot of value now to be created and captured at that upper layer. But it also means that you have to have, incredible execution at multiple phases of a typical SaaS journey in order to capture that opportunity space and deliver the types of returns that you would expect.
And you mentioned the whole bootstrap fundraise, philosophy, and you're less than 12 months in, you're 7 months in or so. So was there a trigger, just in this short amount of time, a trigger that said, all right, now we should raise money? Or was that, we found the company and then let's go find investors right away?
I think this is one of those times where having a couple gray hairs might be helpful, that we knew pretty early on this was going to be a decision. So let's just make it early. And so I think Sri and I did an offsite, in November maybe, and had this discussion, and we're like, hey, that we can build a great bootstrap company. It will, incrementally achieve some value, but there's a really big market opportunity. And I think for us, related to that was the appreciation for just how ubiquitous this problem was and how big the TAM really was. Because we had kind of seen it through the blinders of the, sort of the dog food of the things that we had experienced ourselves. But as we started to research the problem a little bit more broadly, how many industries do this? In what ways do they do their current job? And how can this be an improvement? We started to see that it was a minimum of a $13 billion category, just if we focus on, frankly, one part of the value proposition. I was like, there's a big land grab that's about to happen, and we'd like to be part of that.
And then when you went for the raise at that point in your journey, was it really just the credibility, like that you're back, bringing your experience to the fundraising table and raising on that? Or did you have any early customers or traction that you're also trying to show credibility with a pre-seed raise?
Yes. And as with any big sort of project, there's a lot of scar tissue and learnings along the way. I think for us, our credibility at the early stage was probably the deciding factor, right? So if you think about team traction and timing, there was, we got A+ on the team, right? So Sri and I know this stuff cold. Like, we know what we're doing. We know the space. We know the domain. We have a vision for what this looks like. We know how to execute and build companies. So that was an easy one. I think the traction, we were early, right? There was no traction. It was a brand new company. So let's be serious. Even if we had one person signed up, is that really indicative of traction? Timing was actually the interesting one. We had a mix of feedback around, well, you can just do this in Chat GPT. So it was kind of like that GPT wrapper conversation. And then a mix of, are you going to be a platform? Or can you build out a competitor to one of the platforms, in this space? And it was just a really interesting discussion, I think, for me, around hearing investors and, to a certain extent, strategic buyers, right? So those first customers, think about what are their expectations of this technology? Where do they see this technology in its maturity? And I'll tell you that when Sri and I started this, we really questioned whether or not people would trust artificial intelligence to do security and compliance work on their behalf of any stripe, right? We thought the journey was going to be you can trust the black box. As it turns out, people not only trust it, they're willing to have it write their system security plans or otherwise. But they also wanted it to start with the audits. So it was coming out of doing this for the past 3 years at Amazon and having people question the validity and veracity of artificial intelligence. I think the speed of adoption has been also eye-opening for Sri and me, and it's been super exciting. It's a really exciting time to be in this space.
I mean, one of the things that surprised me on the fundraising was, so we were pretty early with getting our product out to market, even just to early design partners, right? And so it was and then we went GA on January 31st, which is, just 2.5 months after we started the company. And so it was, I think when we started fundraising, it was, you're doing that pre-seed kind of raise, the expectations are you've got a deck and some sort of idea of what it's going to be. But then we actually showed up with a demo and a product, and we had some design partners. And I thought that would actually be helpful, but it was interesting for me, doing this sort of the first time, is that like it made the story a little bit inconsistent. And so like I think like it's really about like calibrating what are you going to do from here, right? Like, so I think like really being able to tell that story of like, okay, cool, we've got that early sort of like traction and we were pretty fast in that movement, but now you've got to tell a sort of a bigger story about where that's going to go for the next year versus that initial story, which we kind of already were able to accomplish with the first raise. So yeah, it was kind of interesting to see like how that process worked depending on what maturity level you had with the product. And
yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, pre-seed or seed round, it's probably unusual. Yeah, you're coming in with, hey, here's my product, let's show it to you, and then we've got those design partners, who are helping us out here. So yeah, really interesting insight. And Andy or Sri, any lessons learned in this process, with, great experience coming in for this raise, and actually, most don't have a product to show, and you're just building, request, asking for that raise on the back of your experience, the team, your knowledge of the market. So any lessons learned that you'd like to share with other founders who may be in similar situations?
So many. I'll say a couple, and Sri, I'm sure will add a couple. One is targeting matters tremendously, right? So you don't want to spend a lot of time. You think of it this way. This is a sales process, right? You are selling a financial instrument, right? Your job is to find people who want to invest in those types of instruments. Put another way, things that create friction in that sales process slow you down as a company and slow you down as, a salesperson, in this case, an equity salesperson, right? So targeting matters tremendously. And related to that is we're in the deep tech space. And so there are a lot of investors who aren't in deep tech or enterprise tech. And so they don't really understand what we're doing. And so we found very early on that those conversations it was just a much more difficult conversation. People who were asking us like, well, how many people need to actually have, security compliance when they deploy? Like everybody, literally every single system. They're like, well, how many is that? I'm like, 100%, whatever that number is, it's 100%. They just had never experienced this before. So that was really, really difficult. I think secondly, to Sri's point, honing that message so that you align the expectations with where you are in your journey, where you're going to be in your journey, and so that people can really figure out what the vibes are for where you're going as a company. But Sri, I don't know, I'm sure you had your own.
Yeah, it's fine. Like a lot of my friends that are, startup founders, they were like, dude, pre-seed and seed, it's all about vibes. It's just vibes. Because there's nothing like really like concrete normally. Like, I mean, we had some more concrete stuff, but I don't think that actually helped, right? Because this pre-seed and seed investors they're not really set up to like gauge your actual like profitability and look at all like do like that level of diligence. It's really vibes. And so like I think that was kind of lost on me a little bit. Like I think I was more like, okay, let's get all the data and like make sure that everything is set up correctly. The other thing I learned is that it's just as much about their fit for you as your fit to them. Like so it's like, I think like 3 or 4 conversations in with a prospective VC, they're like, okay, like, is this what the relationship's going to be like down the road? Like, are we going to be having these types of conversations where we're just talking past each other? And so just as important for us to feel like, okay, maybe this isn't going to be a good fit, in the boardroom or something later on down the road. And so I think like a lot of those things are important. And like, I think really understanding like the whole soft no process, like it, no one's ever going to tell you no. So like, you got to have to read that vibe as well. And so there's just this idea that it's definitely more of an uncharted, I think, feelings versus data-driven kind of experience than I had kind of thought of initially. And so, yeah, and that obviously changes when you get to like day round and other stuff. But like, yeah, at the pre-seed level, it's like dating. Like that first date, there's a lot of data to go on. It's just feelings and vibes. So
yeah, no, appreciate that insight, especially if you're going for those pre-seed seed investors, maybe throwing them off like, hey, here's a real product I'm showing you versus just having, like you said, that vibe conversation, seeing if there's fit there and understanding of the market. So appreciate that insight. And now let's talk a little go-to-market here. And Andy, obviously you're bringing some sales experience to Kovr. So tell us a little, and I know it's early on and go-to-market models change, but tell us a little bit about your sales process right now.
Yeah, it's a great question and something that we've thought deeply about. And I'll give you a little bit of resume to inform what comes next. So at Gartner, it was an enterprise sales motion, right? Typical 3-call plan: qualify, align, and close. Amazon, it was usage-based, obviously, right? It was, as you use more, you adopt more, you grow more, you scale more. And in AI, we've been struck over the past, I don't know, Sri, 2 years about how people seem to be searching for business models that really work for their businesses. I think, the success of companies like Cursor, are indicative of the promise. but there's probably more stories about folks that are trying to figure out what it looks like. For us, what we thought about was, pricing is incredibly difficult, and you're going to be on a journey to figure out what the pricing model ought to be, right? What's the right packaging of price and value to get a customer where they need to be? And, the kind of option landscape is big, but let's just say enterprise SaaS, usage-based, and outcomes-based, right? Those are kind of the three big buckets I would put pricing in. And we went for, at least for now, the enterprise SaaS approach, which is to say, we're selling fixed price software licenses with the usage included in an unlimited way. Meaning, you buy a license with us, you can use the LLM till your heart's content. We have instrumented it such that we can control our costs, we can control the quality, we can manage it to ensure that the customer has a delightful experience, and they get the benefit of predictable pricing. When we think about the enterprise is a really important part of our, frankly, short and long-term sales motion, they like predictability. And so we had to have a quality, predictable licensing model that we could sell through. And that really is about quick transactions, right? So a couple things for your CFO crew under the hood. I thought a lot about cash cycles, right? I thought about sales cycles and cash cycles. I didn't want to be in a situation where I sign somebody up and I may or may not see money in 2 years, right? If you can have a good quality, predictable, all the principles of SaaS we already know work. If I could bring those cash principles into this business model, that would be a huge accelerator for us as we start the hockey stick part of our journey, right? Particularly a hockey stick, right? Where you become really cash constrained when you're trying to grow. So the go-to-market motion, typical sales funnel, mostly right now laid out in a 3-step. I think I'm about to adjust the funnel, a couple qualification steps we're going to introduce, but typical, 3-step sales funnel, a lot of outbound. So a lot of direct calling, doing things that don't scale, right? So finding those customers, those early customers is really, really difficult. Qualifying them so that we're focused on the ones that are, really good fit for us. And now increasingly, you saw last month, we turned on the inbound part of it. So that is coming out of stealth. That's PR initially, and then eventually marketing to create those marketing qualified leads for us. And that sequence of actions has been very effective for us so far. It has allowed us to not spread ourselves too thin too soon and really stay focused on a couple of ICPs while we test a lot of those hypotheses.
Yeah, so much insight there. And so enterprise SaaS approach, both on just kind of that funnel process and then also pricing, because with AI and generative AI and LLMs, where, so many different pricing models that you can go with. And Andy, earlier you talked about friction in the fundraising process. So do you think like not having, say, outcome-based pricing or usage-based pricing in different tiers, do you think that, and just going with like, hey, here's the fixed price, unlimited usage, that's reducing friction in the sales process?
For one category of users, it will reduce it. And for another category, it will increase it. So for this business, right? There's the old Steve Jobs thing, right? You can keep some of the people happy some of the time, right? There's always a distribution of people that are satisfied with your choices. And I think in this case, we optimize for quality, rich engagement with customers versus a couple people that log on, try it out for a little bit, and then fall out of the funnel very early, very quickly, right? That like high churn. We could have gotten a lot more signups early on if it was free or like, basically a penny to get started on a usage-based approach. But we didn't feel that we were going to get the insights that we needed to really understand how to build the product properly. And so in the future, that's not to say we won't think about like a PLG type of motion as well. But just in this early like learning phase, we felt that a little bit of friction, sort of a high bar for qualifying each other, was actually to our benefit.
Yeah. And then I think it's like interesting because, when I was at PwC selling RPA, the idea was like, if you reinvent their business process and also try to sell them a tool, it's a very complicated sale because you're trying to do two things at the same time. And so it's like similar with Gen AI is that like, tokens are already confusing, right? Like people that use GPT or Cursor or any of these tools, like there's always these limits and nobody even really knows what a token is equivalent to. And so we were like, let's not also reinvent the entire sales and pricing model as well. Let's try to like build a product that can at least align with what people are used to buying, like the large enterprises that we want to target. And so, yeah, that was, I think, one of the big challenges from an engineering standpoint, but also I think has paid off because I think the idea that people can buy it and use it as much as they want, it does resonate a lot. And I think that most of the larger enterprises or even the mid-sized ones realize that this is something that they have to keep running over and over again. does it really make sense to have some model that I can't really control? And so, and especially in government contracting, gosh, and one of the things with government contracting is like, you have to be consistent in your pricing. You can't really have like an entirely different commercial pricing model to what you're offering the government. And so that consistency across the board is super important as well. And so,
yeah, that's really interesting. And how I take it, like enterprise, yeah, they want that predictability. They're used to that enterprise SaaS sales approach. But maybe the smaller guys, it's like, hey, I just want to tiptoe into this, give me some usage base. But like you said, Andy, maybe they're not the right customer for your product. So yeah.
I would. Yeah, let me push back a little bit on that though. Small businesses, I mean, look, the very earliest small businesses may not be, what I'm about to say. But even very small businesses are probably paying an MSP to manage their IT, right? They are still paying an IT bill. They are still paying a couple $1,000s a month, sometimes $10,000 a month for typical PR, IT consulting services. And so like the willingness to pay is actually there if you can connect a value that really creates value for that entity.
Yeah, I mean, and the trade-off for a small company is like, hey, I just got this $2 million contract from, the Army or something to send my software there, but now I got to go spend $500,000 or something on the compliance part of it. Well, our software is super compelling, right? Like you've got like, if you can save on that $500,000 bill, but you've got the urgency to get your stuff into the market. And so that's really where I think the line is. And you don't want to have to deal with like any sort of like fluctuations in that because you're baking that into your contract, right? So I think like all of that is kind of
great points. Especially you think about that ROI, you're going after a big contract, even if I am an SMB, and the ROI is there for those guys, especially if they really want to land that big customer.
Okay.
So. And one off-script question here, there's in this SaaS CFO circles, talking about COGS, right? We know like pure play SaaS companies, we're going after 80% gross profit margins. Yep. And we hear, well, AI, it's going to be harder. But then I've heard others where the investors are telling them, no, we expect you to get back up to those pure play SaaS gross margins. So how is it too early yet to start thinking about your COGS and gross profit profile, especially with the unlimited usage?
Nope. So we set that as a bar at the beginning. So there's two sides to this question. I'm going to give you the first half and Sri's got the second half. This was a requirement at the very beginning. We needed an 80% target. Now, we all know that it's going to take a couple of years for us to really have the historicals to substantiate that. But no, we focus on unit costs at the very, very beginning. In our view, at least, when we got this started, we had seen at Amazon a number of people that were just doing the GPT wrapper company, which destroys your unit costs, right? There's really no chance for you to recover your unit costs on that type of a model. And in many ways, you're shipping a bad architecture anyway. So that's the second part of the answer. So Sri, I'm going to turn it over to you, man.
Yeah. So, I mean, initially, right, when we tried to use GPT or any of these large models, Claude or any of these like, Haiku and those kinds of things, you're paying $10 to $15 per million tokens, right? So I'm going to get a little technical, but like you're paying that per million tokens. And for us, a typical compliance job, if I use those types of models, would cost $60, right? Which if you're running thousands of times, you're to your point, you're definitely have very bad margins. And so Andy challenged from a technical and engineering and R&D perspective that, we had to hit that target. And so really one of our big engineering moments was that we're using very, very small, cheap models. And so like my cost is like fractions of a cent, right, for that same million tokens. And really it forces a lot of engineering to go into like how those models get the instructions and how many you use and engineering it. And also we private deploy, meaning that ours can run disconnected from the internet, right? So there's no call out to external models. It needs to be run in very secure environments and things like that. And so, but when you do that though, you can now achieve huge margins, right? Because you're able to, or even pass that savings on to the customers to a huge degree, which is what, one of our big advantages is that cost and time savings that the customers get. And so, that's really, I think one of the tricks with AI is that, early on, it's very tempting to try to use those big models because they give you an easy answer and they do a decent job. But we're quickly going to find that A, the cost is very challenging, and B, even the types of answers that you don't have a lot of control over that model either. And so really encouraging, folks that are working in Gen AI to try to use the smaller models, try to like be more efficient, because when you try to be more efficient, you have to do more engineering, but now it's more valuable and you're driving that into the business as well. So,
well, you guys nailed it. So you had that off script question nailed. So I love that. So I have no data, just intuition that I do think, that those expectations will still be to get to those pure play SaaS gross margins.
Absolutely.
So appreciate that. So Andy or Sri, at this stage of your journey, still early on, but things sounds like going well. Do you have a favorite number or metric, operational metric, financial metric that you're using to guide the business right now?
I don't know, Sri, do you want to take that one first, or?
I think we'll actually have different answers. So like for me
Yeah.
as the CTO, it's about usage for me, right? Like, yes, of course I want dollars and like want the company to grow financially, but for me, it's also usage of the product, right? So like, whether it's our smaller customer, but like how often are people using the product? Is it actually helping them achieve the thing that they're doing? And so for me, for us, it's like, how many successful compliance packages have we assembled? How well have those customers actually succeeded in getting that, stamp of approval that this thing worked? And so for me, it's about the usage of the product by the users. And, obviously like that may not always 100% translate to the financial end goal, but for me, that's kind of my metric that I see as a traction metric.
Yeah, I think for me, no disagreement with anything Sri just said, and I don't think there's any one that really defines the business yet. But for me, the thing that's really occupying my mind is sales cycle, days in pipeline, basically. And that's for a few reasons. One is, I'll give you the entrepreneurs and sales guys answer. The most important document in the company is the proposal, because the proposal is where you codify all of the stuff in the company, the promises you can make, the pricing that you can deliver, the value you can create for a company or for a customer like that. All of that comes together into one place. But the reason why that days in pipe really matter is because that's where we are testing is the value we are creating connecting with somebody? Are we talking to the right people? Are they seeing the value? Are they advancing forward to that, like on their journey? And over time, I think it'll end up becoming days to value. So day from like the first time we meet a customer to the day that they achieve, the first step in their value plan. But I think for now, I'm just focused on that days in pipe because, as I mentioned before, I'm really focused on the cash cycles in this business. And so understanding that, 360 days on a sales cycle is not going to work. We got to get that down to, 30 to 45.
Yeah. Well, appreciate that insight. So usage, days in pipe, really important right now. So a couple more questions before we wrap. Do you guys have a company headquarters location or are you guys remote?
We do have a headquarters. I'm currently at the Hack Factory in Reston, Virginia. It's a startup incubator for cyber companies started by a couple of cyber luminaries.
Okay, nice.
Awesome state. If anyone, Hack Factory, look them up. They're if you're a cyber company, it could be really good.
I was gonna say, if you're a cyber company in the DC area, you come by. This place is awesome.
Okay, so Hack Factory in the DC area. So appreciate that. And Andy or Sri, one last question before we wrap up here. So what's coming up next? I know a lot going on, but what's occupying your mind as far as next steps with the company?
Sri, go ahead, man.
Oh, you may take it. No, I think for us, it's really about we've got a couple of these, very large enterprise customers on board, and so getting them to success. We're at the scaling part now, right? So it's like, getting that early traction is awesome, but now we've got to scale all aspects of the business and including, building up sort of like that program management team that's going to really help drive some of these bigger workloads and things like that. And then for us, now that we're out of stealth, I think it's exciting to be able to go and sort of like interact and engage with the larger ecosystem of companies that are out there that are also working in this space. And so, I think there's a big ecosystem around cyber and compliance, especially in some of these unaddressed regulated markets. And so really cool to now sort of have like, we just partnered with Amazon we have marketplace listings there. Oracle is a big partner, a lot of like other companies like Big Bear. So really excited for some of these partnerships and Second Front. So yeah, loving that part of it as well, just that we're getting to engage with some awesome companies in this space.
Yeah, always so much to do early on. So Andy, Sri, really appreciate your time today, sharing your journey. If listeners would like to learn more about Kovr and maybe they need some help with compliance, where should we send them online?
Kovr.ai, and you can always reach out to me, ab@kovr.ai.
Yeah,
all right.
LinkedIn's good too. So feel free to just hit me up on it.
We should be pretty easy to find.
Yeah, it is. If you type that in LinkedIn, I found it right away. So kovr.ai and then ab@kovr.ai to learn more.
That's right.
And Andy, Sri, really appreciate your time and sharing your experience today.
Thank you so much for having us. This was awesome. So much fun.